privacy. Instead, it's much better to have a holistic view of how you're going to address privacy and treat it. And a really great way to do that is to find a framework or regulation and use your privacy program to adhere to that and align with that. So, unsurprisingly, our survey results found that 49% of people use the European GDPR. Followed by that was the NIST privacy framework. That's the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology. In third and fifth place were ISO standards, and then in fourth place was the COBIT framework. Of course, these are not all of the frameworks and regulations that people use. These are just the top 5 most popular. And if you download our survey report, we actually have 17 additional frameworks and regulations that organizations use to manage their privacy programs. And with that, I will turn it back over to Karen.
These events and their consequences have the potential for both of the following, both a threat to success.
So let's focus now on workforce and hiring trends.
So as an example, in the case of COVID,
with the explosion of privacy mandates across the world, it's no surprise that the demand for skilled privacy professionals exceeds the supply.
Well, you're in relatively good shape.
I want to turn back to some of the stats I inundated you with at the beginning of this presentation. I want you to recall that the organizational size varied a lot amongst respondents.
You weren't doing any business.
21% of respondents came from organizations that had less than 250 employees.
Kind of restaurant, but what is fascinating
and 24% of respondents came from enterprises that had more than 25,000. So the gamut was really wide.
The inside of the store
and I think it's important to keep that in mind when we look at the next
what I want
statistics.
to show in this particular
the average number of full-time employees in privacy in an organization was 22.
9 months to do it.
But the median privacy staff
size
was 7.
So this particular slide comes from Georgia Tech.
This disparity can easily be explained by larger enterprises employing considerably more individuals dedicated to privacy.
Particular type of event.
The survey showed that
based on the number of cases
in terms of organizational structure,
region, it's describing what your chances
quite a bit
of getting
across
COVID
organizations.
Is. So in the case
in some
of
organizations,
a dinner party,
privacy roles were scattered throughout the enterprise.
15,000 people infected
and in
with COVID,
some,
you'd have
a privacy
1.43
group was
chance
very
of
much
getting
centralized.
On the other hand, taking
we wanted
it to
to
an
understand,
extreme,
regardless of where a role was structured within an organization, we wanted to hone in on 2 different types of roles regarding privacy. One are those that are performing legal and compliance functions within privacy. And the other is what we call technical privacy. Those would be the professionals that are actually doing the coding, they're putting the controls in place. Many of them have a security background or even work in a security department.
Definition or to provide you with a little bit of an understanding.
46% of respondents reported that technical privacy roles were understaffed.
My risk
and that figure of understaffed was only 33% for legal and compliance.
We use the term
now, on their face, those numbers seem rather high.
Any controls,
I'd like to compare that against cybersecurity, however.
Now, I do have some pre-existing conditions that
more
are
than 5 years,
that are in
does
addition
a
to the
similar
inherent risk. In my case,
in
I
the
belong to an age
cybersecurity
group
field. Some of you may be familiar with that. We have several survey reports that come out of that every year.
My controls, the controls
in
that
the
I have
last
chosen
cybersecurity
to
report,
reduce the risk
62% of cybersecurity professionals felt that they were understaffed.
Contracting it and
so
potentially dying or giving it to my wife. I wear a
understaffing
mask
results
in public.
are somewhat startling at 46 and 33.
I stay away from
when you
sick
contrast
people.
that with the 62% in
cybersecurity,
privacy is actually in a much better place, or at least there's a perception of being in a better place. Privacy, like cybersecurity, is a field that respondents expect to grow. 70% believe that the demand for technical privacy roles will increase in the next year, and 59%
We're going to be
the demand
talking,
will increase
we
in
do
legal
talk a
and
lot
compliance,
about in the C-risk class,
privacy
the
roles.
importance of governance in the creation of a risk management program. Governance
In
simply
terms of unfilled
telling
positions,
people what the right thing to
25%
do
of respondents
It is from the
indicated
top
that they
down.
had open
It is an
headcount
organizational strategy,
in
if
privacy
you will,
technical roles,
to minimize
versus
risk within the
17%
organization
in legal
to
and
optimize the
compliance
resources
open
you have
roles.
available to
Open
you.
roles, pardon me.
We're going to talk about
While
the
those
tangible. We do talk
statistics
about
seem
the
to
tangible
indicate that
benefits of
technical
risk
privacy
management.
roles could be
And I
more
always
difficult
maintain
to
that
fill,
the prime benefit
the
is the
survey results
allocation of
actually
capital.
belie this to
You
a degree.
can't fix everything. You
In
can't
terms
address
of how
everything.
long
You
it
have to
takes
figure
to
out
fill
what
an
are the
open
things
position,
that have the
the
greatest
results
impact
are
to your
similar,
organization and
with
what can I
technical
do to
privacy
minimize
roles
those.
being only slightly more difficult to fill.
Whatever we do in terms of
If we
IT
contrast
risk
this again
management, those
against
have to be in
cybersecurity,
alignment with organizational
cybersecurity
objectives.
again
If we
dwarfs
attempt to reduce
what
the risk
we're
of a
finding in
particular
privacy.
IT system,
In our
and it
latest
somehow
cybersecurity
interferes
survey,
with the nature of the
29%
business, that's not
indicate
what
that it
risk
takes
management
6
is
months
about.
or more
We're
to
supposed
fill
to
a
be
position in
working together
cybersecurity. While our
ensure that we are
privacy survey,
minimizing
as
risk
shown
to
on
an
the screen,
acceptable
show that
level
it
in
takes,
alignment
or
with our
12% of
organization's
respondents
objectives.
said it took 6 months or more to
Certainly,
fill a
risk
privacy
management is a lot about business
role in legal and
continuity under rather
compliance,
adverse
and
situations.
14% indicated that it took 6
There
months
are
or more
particular
to fill a
kinds
role in
of risk
technical
that we
privacy.
explain in detail.
Part of the challenge
control
for
risk is that the control
in
doesn't
filling
do what it
open
was supposed to
positions
do.
may be a lack of
If you have
qualified
projects,
applicants.
the risk of the project
In
not being
looking at
completed
what
on
do
time is a
employers
good or
value
service
most
that
when
will not be
looking at an
available for
applicant,
you to use that aligns
prior
with your
privacy
organizational objectives.
experience is the clear
And certainly
winner.
change risk is not so much
The
about
least
what
important
breaks,
factor, according to the
but
survey,
understanding
is a
what the level of
recommendation
risk is.
from a
Before
previous
I make
employer.
a change, I know
In
exactly
short,
what the level of risk for any
demonstrated
particular system
experience is
If I
way more
don't
important than a
manage
formal
change
education or
I
references
won't know
from a
what's going to
former
happen. I will have
employer.
an unknown level
One
of
little
risk.
tidbit that we found very
IT risk
interesting at
management,
ISACA
at
Global
least the way we teach
was
it in
that
the C-risk
5%
class,
of respondents
is about following
indicated
best
that a university
international
degree is
frameworks,
not at
be it
all
NIST,
important
be it
when they
ISA,
are filling
be it
open
COVID.
privacy roles or
What we
looking
do
at
teach
candidates.
everyone in the class is
That
what is
might
the
be
best
a
way to run a
reflection
risk
of the
management
global
program.
nature of the
If you
respondents
don't
taking
run
the
it well,
survey.
you'll do it
And
again.
it might mean that,
It will cost
just
you a lot
different
of money
cultures
to
and
do
different
it again,
regions
so you'd like to do it right
don't
the first
view
time.
university
And of course, setting up a
degree as
risk management
preparing
program
someone to take on a privacy
can be
role.
rather disruptive, so you want to do
Turning
it
to
right.
skills gaps,
And you'll
experience
minimize the
again
chance of doing
tops
it
the
wrong,
list.
which will support your business
60%
objectives.
noted a skills
In the
gap
very
in
first
terms of
domain of the
experience with
C-risk
different
class,
types
we
of
go
technology
over
or applications.
IT risk identification.
51% of
So you
respondents
could look at
indicated that
IT
there was
risk
a skills gap
identification really
with
as
understanding the
writing
laws
a
and
really
regulations
bad
to which the
novel
organization
about
is
some
subject.
imminent disaster where you're trying to
Finally,
think of every possible
50%
scenario of things that can go wrong.
noted a gap with
Well,
experience
what we're
in
going to do
using
is we're going
frameworks
to take a look
and
at some of the
controls.
scenarios for potential risk
So what are
that were
organizations doing
presented to
to
us
address the
by the
skills gap?
Cyberspace
The
Solarium
most
Commission.
prevalent is training,
In the first case,
both
one of
by
their
training
recommendations
non-privacy
was to
staff so they can
incentivize the
move into
uptake
privacy
of
roles,
secure cloud
and
services for
by
small,
using
medium
performance-based
businesses,
training so
state,
individuals
local,
can
tribal,
show
and
their
territorial
skills
governments.
or demonstrate
So
that they've
if I'm
mastered
looking
a
at this
skill.
as a risk
Other
professional,
tactics to address
I'm
the
looking
skills
at,
gap
wait a minute,
included
do I even
increased
have
use
a cloud
of contract
policy?
employees,
The reason you have a cloud
reliance
policy
on
is you did a risk
credentials,
assessment of the cloud.
and the use of artificial
cryptographic
intelligence
key
or
management.
automation.
If you need to
These
encrypt
again
your
are
data
very
because
similar
it
to the
is going
findings in
into
our
a cloud,
annual cybersecurity survey.
typically an environment
Now I'll turn it
where
back
it
to
is
Safia to present the
multi-tenancy, where
findings
your data
on
is
privacy
going to be
breaches
on
and data protection.
devices with
Safia?
other people's data. You need really good
All right, thank you for
cryptographic
that.
key management.
And
If you
before
don't
we talk
have
about
that,
our survey
you're
results
gonna
when
have
it
to
comes
deal
to
with
privacy
alternatives.
breaches, we want to hear from you.
Has an Internet
Has
of
your
Things
organization
law,
experienced
the risk
material
identified
privacy
in
breach
particular
in the
what I'm
last
thinking
12
here is
months?
something
And
like
your
my
options
Apple
are
Watch.
A, yes, B,
Well,
no,
there's
C,
compliance
prefer
risk
not to
around
answer,
PII
and D,
PHI,
don't
and
know.
I actually read something really interesting about this. If you hypothetically had a device like a temperature scanner, and it was
All right, I'll
capable
give you
to be
about 10
tied
more
into your
seconds.
identity management system of your organization. Well, wait a minute. All of a sudden, we're collecting data about
All
where
right, let's
people
see what
are
our results
and
are.
what their medical condition is.
Okay.
Did you tell
So this
people
is
that you were
actually
going to collect
kind
that
of what I
data,
expected,
did
and
they
it's
sign
somewhat
off
similar
on
to
it?
the findings of our survey.
It is conceivable, especially again,
So,
with a
per
lot
our
of people
survey
working
results,
from home, we
only
may have
10%
insecure,
of respondents
non-upgradable
report that their
appliances,
enterprise
like
experienced
routers,
a
as
material
an example.
privacy breach in the
If you
last 12
couldn't
months.
upgrade a particular
For
device
us
and
here at
somebody's
Isaka
working
Global,
from
that was a
home,
little bit
does it
surprising. That
represent
number
a
seemed a
problem?
little bit low, but there are a few possible
If
reasons
we were to
for
look
why
to
that number may be
establish
so
a
low.
national cybersecurity
So first of all,
certification,
we
labeling
did
authority,
give the
well, the one
option
that came
of
up
prefer
to
not
my
to respond
mind
as a
immediately
choice,
was if
and
you need a
11% of
data
people
classification
selected that.
program.
Now, of course, I'm sure
You
some
could
of you
either
selected that, but that
overspend
doesn't mean you
or
experienced a
underspend
breach.
on
It just meant you
controls.
didn't want to share. So
Establish
it's quite
liabilities
possible,
for
though,
final
that this
goods
10% number is actually a little
assemblers.
bit higher
The
from our
risk
pool.
there that is being
The other
identified
possibility is
is
that
supply
different people
chain
may
risk.
have defined
And I would
material
wholeheartedly
privacy breach
encourage
in
you to
different
look up some
ways, and that could
documentation on
also possibly
CMMC,
account for this
because
seemingly
that's
low
the
number.
Defense Department's
But even though the
initiative
number of
to
breaches
make
is
sure
fairly
that
low,
they
there
are
are a few
matching
very
supply
commonly
chain
used
risk for
controls
anyone
when
that
it
is
comes to
supplying
privacy.
anything to the Defense
The biggest
Department.
being encryption. Up here we
Develop
have
a
some of the
strategy
privacy
to
controls that are
secure
used by
foundational
a
internet
majority of our
protocols
survey
and
respondents,
email.
but of course there are so many
Well,
other
who
controls.
says that
Some other
everything we
commonly
have
used controls that were
that
indicated
regarding
by our
email or
respondents
network protocols
include
is configured
cryptographic
correctly?
protection, data
In
quality and
particular, I'm thinking
integrity,
of even
data
using something
minimization
like
and
Office
retention,
365,
use
where
limitation,
there are
and
controls that
pseudonymization.
are shared controls. There is stuff that you have
And
to do. There is
next, we'll
stuff
talk a
that
little bit about
Microsoft
privacy
will
by
have to do.
design. So privacy by design
There are
ends up
other
being a
things that
pretty
we teach
big
in
chunk
Domain
of
1
our
that will
survey
help your
report and of
organization.
the actual survey
The
questions.
first one is
And
a
there are a
very
couple of
important
reasons
one.
for
You
that.
need to understand
One of the
what your
big ones
risk
is that
capacity
it's
is.
just
How
something
much
that's
risk
now being
can you
touted as
accept
really important to
before
do
you
as you
actually
build
go out of
products moving
business?
forward.
What is your
Additionally, it's an
appetite
element
for
of
this? Some people
GDPR.
are
And
more
so we were
risk- some
curious to see
organizations
if
are
there
more
were any
risk
interesting
averse
trends that
than
emerge
others.
among organizations
Some
that
are
always
willing
use
to
privacy by
accept
design.
more risk to accomplish
So first,
something
just
for
to
their
level set a little bit,
objectives.
in this
And
context,
the idea
privacy
of
by
tolerance
design,
is
as
the
defined in the
variance. And a
GDPR,
very
is
simple
just
example
data
of that is
protection
if you
throughout
go to at least a
technology
doctor's
design.
office where I
As you
live
can see
or any
here,
other
a little
public
bit more than
location,
half of our
sometimes
respondents
what they're
say that
going
they
to do is
always
they're going to
or
scan
frequently
your
use
forehead.
privacy
Well,
by
if the
design.
temperature that they're scanning is
And
somewhere
we also
between,
noticed
say,
something kind of
96 and
interesting when it
99,
comes
you
to
don't have
hiring
a
privacy
problem. Anything
professionals
within that
in
range is
organizations that
fine.
always use
If you're
privacy
over
by
100,
design.
on the other hand,
So those
no,
who
it's not
always
going to
practice
work.
privacy by design tend to place a
Risk is
higher importance on
fundamentally
hiring
something
individuals based
everybody
on their
understands. Get out of
credentials,
bed in the morning,
based
you
on their
have
technical
risk.
experience,
But now what you
and then
need to
based
do
on their
is establish
completion of hands-on
communication channels
privacy
so that as
training
you
courses.
implement controls to reduce
So,
the level of
one more
risk
question for
within
you.
your
We are
organization,
curious
there's a
to
feedback
hear, how often
mechanism
does your
that can
organization
adjust
use
the
privacy by
controls as
design?
required.
Is it A, always,
As we talked about
B,
earlier, there
frequently,
we go through the
C,
basic elements
sometimes,
of risk.
D, rarely, or E, don't know?
Security risk concepts and principles, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Creating a risk strategy for your business. Again, there are plenty
Give
of
you
good
about 10 more
examples that we
seconds.
go over in the class. There are fundamentals of IT that we discuss in the C-Risk class.
All right, let's take a
So
look.
even if you weren't technical, you
Okay,
at least will
interesting.
get an
So this
understanding
is
of
somewhat
some
closely
basic
aligned to what we
technologies.
found with our survey.
We're going to talk
And
about
so
risk
the
identification.
following discussion is
That
if
is
you are
anything
already
that could
using
possibly
privacy by
happen.
design, either frequently,
And in
always,
that
sometimes, or
process
you're not
of
sure if you want to.
identifying risk,
I think this is going to
what we're
be
going to
kind
do
of
is create
interesting
a
and
living
show some
document
interesting
referred to
trends
as a
that we
risk
find
register.
among those that do
So
always use
every
privacy by
risk we
design.
identify will, and as
So
we're going
what we
to talk
did is
about
we
in the
compared
next domain, be
enterprises that
assessed.
always use privacy by
We're going to
design
keep a
to our
record
total
of all
response
the
pool.
decisions
And one of the
who
things that we
owned
found
a
is that
particular risk at any
22%
given
of those
point
who
in time
always
and
use
what was
privacy
done
by
about the
design
risk.
see privacy
This, I
programs
find,
as
would
purely
be
compliance,
particularly useful
compared to
if
34%
something
of
happened
total
with your
respondents.
organization and you could
We
demonstrate
also saw
due
that
diligence
24%
and
of
due
those who
care.
always use privacy by design are completely
The
confident in
second
their ability to
domain of
ensure
the
data
C-Risk
privacy and
course
achieve
is
compliance
about
with new
risk
privacy laws
assessment.
and regulations.
What we're
This
going
is
to do
nearly
is we're going to play with
2.5
the same
times
issues
higher
that
than
we
our total
confronted
survey response.
from the
However, I
Solarium
think there needs to be a little bit of
Space
caution
Commission's
here.
recommendation.
So if you'll recall
And we're
previously
going
when
to
I was talking about
elaborate
breaches,
them
I said that
as we go through
of our
this.
total survey respondents,
some of the
10%
things
said
that
that
we
they
figured
experienced a material privacy breach in the last 12 months. We were curious, of those who always practice privacy by design, how many of them experienced a breach?
Key management,
10%. It was the same across the entire group, and then also those who always use privacy by design. So I think it's really important important that just because we use privacy by design or have the best possible controls in place, that doesn't mean that we're going to be immune to a breach. And privacy by design doesn't mean that you don't need to worry about a privacy breach. It could, in fact, still happen. So my big word of caution is if you always or frequently use privacy by design, just be prepared for the possibility of a breach. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen, but just don't allow yourself to have a false sense of confidence and think you're immune to it. Now let's kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about the tone at the top and amongst organizations that always use privacy by design versus everyone. So of those that always use privacy by design, 77% of our respondents said that they believe that their boards of directors adequately prioritize privacy. This is 25% higher than the total responses. We also saw a slightly larger median staff size, 12 for those who always use privacy by design versus 7 total. Now, I don't want to give you the wrong impression. It's not that if you suddenly now start always using privacy by design, your board is suddenly going to support you and your staff is going to grow. Odds are it's that the tone at the top is enabling all of this to happen. If your board of directors is adequately prioritizing privacy and giving it the resources and attention that it needs, it's more likely that you'll be able to always use privacy by design. You also may have the resources to have a larger staff, and therefore having a larger staff allows you to use privacy by design and do all of those great privacy initiatives more because you just have more resources. It also seems like budgets are likely affected by this tone at the top. So enterprises that always use privacy by design are more likely to report their privacy program is appropriately funded. 55% say it's appropriately funded versus 34% total. So if we think back to previously where we saw that 4% of organizations don't have a person accountable for privacy, we see that that's concerning. It's important to have a strong advocate for privacy because when you have the board support and when the tone at the top is one that's supportive of privacy, privacy teams are able to just do a lot more and they're not constrained by their resources. And this just makes the organization stronger, not just from a privacy perspective, but overall. All right, and with that, I will turn it over to Karen.
Managing risk in projects and programs. Programs are nothing more than a series of projects that are designed to achieve a particular goal.
Take a look at what is the future for privacy.
That is the notion
Despite the
COVID-19
based pandemic,
on probability and impact.
The pandemic's impact on the financial well-being of many organizations, the demand for privacy roles continues to be high.
The risk register is going to be a living
As I previously noted, 70% believe that the demand for technical privacy professionals will increase in the next year, and 59% believe that the demand for legal and compliance roles will increase in the next year. Only 2% believe that legal compliance roles will decrease, and only 1% of respondents believe that technical privacy roles will decrease.
Of the C-risk class,
this is interesting to compare or contrast with the results that Safia earlier talked about in terms of budget. If you'll recall, only 14% believe that their budget will decrease. And yet this slide, or these findings say
some of the
demand for
things
roles
that we
will,
train individuals
only 1
in
or
that will help your
2%
organization
will
in domain
decrease.
3
So there's a little bit of a
is making sure
disparity there.
whatever we
Going
choose
back
that
to
it
what
is in
Safia was
alignment
talking
with
about
business
earlier,
objectives.
privacy is largely being prioritized by boards of directors, and enterprises are embracing it even in uncertain economic circumstances.
We don't want to spend all of our money mitigating risk.
This should really come as no surprise given the growing number of new laws and regulations and regions mandating
mitigating,
privacy rules that enterprises
and potentially
must comply with.
Cost-benefit
and
analysis
going forward, we only see an increase in the terms of the number of mandates that enterprises are going to have to face in terms of privacy rules that may not always harmonize with other laws and regulations around the world. As companies become more global, or they operate in more than one region,
chance, and I always consider this to be the most
compliance effort
risky,
will only
if you will,
increase.
thing about implementing controls. You can break stuff. If you're telling me that you want to install an agent to reduce the risk of someone making a change without your knowing about it, and that agent diminishes the performance of your environment, that's
with finding skilled individuals to fill privacy
One
vacancies.
of the other things that we discuss in Domain 3 is about reevaluating business processes.
Namely, get creative.
Now, the reason I put in
leverage
the
talent from adjacent
GDPR
disciplines. For technical roles, leverage your legal and compliance people. Look to your security professionals and move them into a technical
hypothetical that I could think of in this particular case is one where,
in fact, our survey found that 26% were doing exactly just that. They were leveraging talent already within their enterprise and moving them into a privacy role. Enterprises can offer educational incentives to get candidates trained through
we
a formal university education, perhaps in the evenings, or through certification
making
programs.
Sure the controls actually works, because if they don't,
Safia mentioned, and you just took a polling question on whether the respondents' enterprise had experienced a material privacy breach in the last year. That question was backward looking.
The assigning ownership of controls.
But we also asked respondents to predict whether they would experience a breach in the coming year.
So here are some potential responses to some of the previously identified risks, and I have these in red.
What is the likelihood that your organization will experience a data privacy breach in the coming 12 months?
That's the way we're going to mitigate the risk of somebody just buying an Amazon account.
Neither likely nor unlikely.
For poor cryptographic key management,
don't know,
we might make the decision of mitigating it by outsourcing it to somebody who actually knows what they're doing. Compliance risk around PII and PHI. Data classification would be the first thing, that is, we identify what is personally identifiable information. But second, for compliance reasons, and because data is so fungible these days, it can be any place at any given time, you need to know where your stuff is.
All right.
It might be in one country one day, it might be in one state one day, and it might be somewhere else the following day.
6.1% said very likely, with 21% saying likely.
Policy, or we could make sure our
are a little different than our survey results. And if I might just opine, it could be that you're all a little bit more realistic.
Lack of a data classification program. We're going to make people accountable by establishing data ownership.
We're at 21%. Our survey said 19, so very close.
Demonstrating some level of cyber
again,
maturity.
we appreciate your honesty. Only 7.4% of you said you preferred not to answer. Our survey results showed that 13%.
For improper configuration of network protocols,
I can show the results.
We will
said they
establish
preferred not to
standards,
say.
and we will enforce those standards.
So you can see from our survey results,
in Domain 4
only
of the
17% of respondents said it was likely that they would experience a breach in the next year.
All the things we've discussed so far,
unlikely was 17%. Very unlikely, so 27%.
You can go and look at the way the United States government oversees the risk
results somewhat
of the various agencies and the amount of
generally,
data that
we
actually
felt
has
like,
to flow
wow, people are pretty optimistic about their ability to avoid a material or combat a material privacy breach.
Begins with the notion
what are
of helping
doing
people
to ensure
identify
that privacy controls are in place, working, and that data is secure, despite
Now, the key risk indicators are very forward-looking in nature.
One way might be
what
through
they're going
automation.
to essentially do is give us a really good idea as to what might happen.
On the survey, we asked respondents to let us know if they're using artificial intelligence, predominantly machine learning, RPA,
key performance indicator
in their
to see if we
privacy
accomplish our
practices.
goals.
You can see that
we do need to manage the data
31% of
that is going to be
respondents
used
said
for
that their
reporting.
enterprises
Garbage
already
out,
use or
garbage in.
plan to
We
use
could be looking
AI
at a
in the next 12
tremendous amount
months.
of log files.
But
that now need to be
42%
managed.
said they
We're not
had
talking
no
about simply
plans
having
to
it in
use
one place,
AI.
but you could have it
Again, this is very,
You
very
could have
similar
it
to
in
our
one cloud,
findings in
you could have it in
cybersecurity, where we
multiple
asked a
clouds.
similar question.
It's the scope of
In
this
the cybersecurity
is
survey,
immense, but we teach
43% said they
people
had
how
no
to
plans
at
to
least
use
begin the
AI versus
process of
privacy that said
determining
42.
What does indeed
And
need to be monitored.
30%
and the
said
level
they're
of monitoring
currently
activity.
using
That, by
AI
the way, will be largely based on the
in
volatility of
security
controls
compared to
and how frequently they are
31% in
used.
privacy.
We go through different
The
control
parity
assessments
between the
types.
privacy
I spend a lot of
results
time
and the
talking about this
cybersecurity
methodology
results
because
should
it
come
is
as no
free.
surprise, as
And how to
many
communicate the
taking
results.
the privacy
If I,
survey
as an example,
have
found
a security
flaw in a
background.
particular weapons systems software,
And with
can't let
that,
that
I'm going
information be
to
disclosed
open it up
to
for
people who shouldn't be
questions.
seeing it.
Fantastic.
that
Thank
we
you so much,
also talk a
Karen. We
lot
have
about in the CERIS
quite a few questions that have
course
come in. Thank you
is
to
the
our
reevaluation of the risk
extremely
profile of the
amazing
organization.
audience. They are very
The
interactive.
organizations
Okay, here's a
evolve
question for
over
you.
time.
You mentioned that
Their risk profile is
26%
going to
said
change
they were
over
training
time. If
individuals
you've
from
had
their
an
company
adverse event,
to move
you
into
might be
privacy
more risk
roles.
averse.
What kind of
If you
training
acquire
did they
another
do to
organization
accomplish that?
and they may be as not in compliance as you are,
Unfortunately,
in those
the
particular
survey didn't
circumstances,
get
your
into
risk
the
profile has
particulars
changed.
of
And we
how
discuss
they were
that
doing
and help
that.
you manage the
From
changes
just
in your risk
general knowledge,
profile.
we can tell you that
So
if
these are things that
if
we
you take a security
discussed earlier.
professional and you put them
It's
into
about
a
monitoring and
technical privacy
reporting.
role,
So
a lot of those
essentially what
skills
we're
just
looking at
transfer
are the
over. It's really
controls
just the requirements
for
might change a
dealing
little
with
bit.
lack of cloud of governance over cloud
In terms of
implementation,
legal
where we
and
decide to create a
compliance,
cloud
if you
policy.
have a person in legal and
For core
compliance that really
cryptographic key management,
understands
we're mitigating that by outsourcing.
what a company
For
must do
compliance
from
risk
a
around
legal
PII and
compliance
PHI, we've
perspective.
done data classification as a control, and we
And
now
that
know where
person
our
has a
stuff is.
technical bent.
For
If you can
insecure
train
and
them on the
upgradable
technologies
appliances,
they need
we
or the
have a
coding
hardware
they need to
acquisition
do or
policy and
the
third-party
even
vendor
writing
management.
technical
For
requirements,
lack of a data
you're
classification
really way
program,
ahead of the game
we've
because you have
established
somebody that's
data
going
ownership.
to be able
For
to write a
supply
requirement,
chain risk,
for example,
we
that
put in
says
controls
by implementing the specific requirement,
demonstration
you will
of
be
cyber
in
maturity, and we're
compliance.
going to be looking for SSA
Safia, anything to
teams
add?
for improper configuration.
I would agree. I
of
think
network
that's all
protocols
great. And I think
email.
it's also important
We've
to
created
get creative.
standards,
So
and now
if
we're
you
going
have
to
a legal
enforce
and
them.
compliance team who's kind of doing a lot of the work, can you have
What you're
someone
now
from another
seeing in
department
green
shadow them
is the
and kind of
monitoring
learn a
of
little
the
bit on the